The architecture of the Tang Dynasty, one of the most powerful civilizations in the East, still enchants Chinese people after 1,000 years. Now, CGTN Art Series will take you back through time to the high days of Tang, rebuilding the glorious structures of the age. Join us as we reconstruct magnificent palaces, roam the avenues of the medieval world, and rediscover spaces that were once lost in time. Our journey starts here. Welcome to Foguang Temple. Built in the 9th century in North China's Shanxi province, this Tang Dynasty marvel is the oldest building of its kind in the country. Its importance in Chinese architecture is probably rivaled by none. Beyond the details of its design, which has allowed it to withstand the test of time, the story of the temple's discovery is equally fascinating. Joining me to visit this ancient building is Wang Yongxian, former director of Ancient Architecture Management Shanxi Province Cultural Heritage Administration. 王老师你好，欢迎来到我们的演播室。
Hi, Mr. Wang. Welcome to our program. Hello. Please introduce yourself to our audience. Hi, everyone. My name is Wang Yongxian. I'm from Shanxi. In northern China, my career can be roughly divided into two stages. In the first half, I was on the front line of cultural relic protection. I was engaged in emergency rescue, restoration, protection, and redesigns of ancient architectures in Shanxi. After retiring, I went through a change in my identity, becoming a blogger focusing on ancient Chinese architecture. Thanks to the short videos we produced within a few years, I have had a big following on the internet. I was even given a nickname, which is Grandpa Dougong. But you still look so young. Before we get into today's topic, I wanted to share with us your feelings as an influencer in the field of cultural relic protection. Well, it has been a gradual process. At the very beginning, I was just groping my way forward, and I wasn't very familiar with the shooting and video editing. Well, I'm not young because this is a new phenomenon. In the past, I used to write academic papers or books, and then I was at the university giving some lectures to the young people. Inspired by my students, I got to know the internet and started to produce short videos. This is how I got into the track of influencing or live streaming, and we got a few hundred clicks in the beginning. Until then, in one particular episode, which was filmed at the Holy Mother Hall in Geng Shuo Temple, we received over 100,000 views, and from then on, it just took off. So, why is it that on emerging online platforms like short video apps in recent years, so many people are paying attention to cultural heritage protection and artifacts and history? So this is a very good question. For ancient structure, China has a 5,000-year-old history of civilization. Ancient architecture embodies excellent traditional Chinese culture throughout different dynasties, from the pre-Qin period to Tang and Song and Yuan, all the way to Qing Dynasty. And we have great architectural works in every dynasty. At the time, it's politics, economy, military, culture, art. They were all presented in terms of ancient architecture. Therefore, the excellent traditional Chinese architecture is very profound and extensive, and it has the infinite charm in itself, and after thousands of years, the ancient buildings preserved to this day are quite few. But Shanxi province boasts a large proportion of these buildings. We have 28,027 such architecture. That is roughly 30,000. But the reason that most of them are well preserved in Shanxi is that Shanxi is a land of mountains and rivers with rugged terrain and landscape. Also, it has a fairly low humidity. Bearing in mind that water and moisture are major threats to ancient architecture, so with a relatively dry terrain environment, Shanxi has preserved a considerable number of ancient architecture. And also Shanxi has very simple folk customs, and people of Shanxi, they have a kind of innate reverence for the culture passed down from generations, so they spontaneously protect it and restore it. So how many buildings of Tang that we have in Shanxi now? According to the Cultural Relic Survey, and there are only 4 Tang architectures left, and they are Nanshan Temple, Foguang Temple, and in the south, Ruicheng Guyuan Temple and Wulong Temple. So why is Foguang Temple so prominent among them? Well, indeed, the Foguang Temple is a Tang Dynasty legacy that has been preserved to this day. You know, the Tang Dynasty was a very glorious period in our history, from politics and economy and national strength and other perspectives. According to historic records, the Tang Dynasty left behind great works, including the Mingtang Hall built in Wu Zetian's era and the Sky Hall. Those were very exceptional buildings, even unmatched with today's standards. And we're talking about high buildings, but because of various historic reasons, and those were completely destroyed. So if we want to see the history of Tang Dynasty in terms of tangible and touchable, we can only imagine the real grandeur of Tang architecture through actual objects. So one that can best represent the Tang Dynasty is the Great East Hall. It has 7 bays, and it's very magnificent, and you can see that the columns and the beams and Dougong are very large. It shows the bold style in Tang Dynasty. So why, for such a majestic building, it wasn't until the 1930s that it was rediscovered? The Great East Hall of Foguang Temple of Tang Dynasty, from the time it was built, it has been quietly standing there for more than 1,000 years. It has been around for a very long time. In fact, it is exactly because it was unknown that it has been preserved until present. Yes, it's located in the mountains and forests, unknown to the outside world, but in the 1930s it was widely known. So what was the serendipity? So we have to thank the master in ancient architecture, Mr. Liang Sicheng. In the 1930s, there was a Society for Research in Chinese Architecture, led by Mr. Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin. So they were the pioneers in this field, and Mr. Liang believed that there must be Tang architectures preserved across China. They were just kept unknown. So they began a survey trip nationwide, and they have been to other places, including initially in Hebei, Shanxi, and Henan province, with Shanxi as the focus, of course. So in 1937, they got some material through all sorts of information, and including those from Dunhuang. Inside a cave in Dunhuang, there was the mural of Foguang Temple. They also looked at some other documents. So they speculated that there might be early buildings or the Tang architectures preserved in Shanxi. So in the summer and autumn of 1937, a few days before the Marco Polo Bridge incident on July the 7th, when transportation was still very difficult, they departed from Beijing. They took a train to Taiyuan, and then from Taiyuan to Mount Wutai. So they had to travel through various places with many parts of the journey. Sometimes they have to ride the donkeys, and they made themselves finally to the Mount Wutai, and they finally arrived at the Foguang Temple and discovered the Great East Hall. And after their study, they finally confirmed that the hall was built in the 11th year of Dazong of Tang. So to confirm it is a Tang building, you need some evidence. What was the strong evidence to prove that this architecture was from Tang Dynasty? So this is a very professional question. That's the dating of ancient architecture with which we can confirm when an architecture was built. And this is a basic task that we often perform, and we call it the relic survey. In a large-scale relic survey, we encounter all kinds of ancient buildings. We have those large volumes and large capacity of buildings and with 7 bays or 5 bays, but most have 3 bays. And regardless of the size, we have to determine when it was built, whether it's from Song or Tang Dynasty. So we have to determine when the building was completed. And you need to rely on some references. On the one hand, we look at the relevant literature and materials, historical documents, including local chronicles and historical books. Also, we look at the inspirations and records inside the hall, and this is also an important reference. So historical records and materials are one part, and another is to look at the building itself, the individual building, its overall beam structure, its Dougong, and some characteristics of the lower part of the building. And also you can compare it with other similar buildings. So in this way, we comprehensively compare and eliminate the confusing information. Another very important thing is the inscription, which may contain accurate information of the building. So what does it mean specifically? So on the one hand, it refers to text on the stele, the stone carving. It was a tradition in the past that when a grand building was completed, you'd leave something in writing, so to record this event. So that is why a stele was erected with writings on it. So you need to record the background, who was the sponsor of the building, what was the background, who were the investors. So that was the tradition. And also wooden structures on the beams of the hall, like the Great East Hall of Foguang Temple, we can find inscriptions, and we found the name of a person, and outside the hall on a stone pagoda, we found an inscription that the 11th year of Dougong era of Tang, together with the name Ninggong Yu. The name also appeared inside the hall on a beam, so they are the same person. So it's a perfect match. So this is how we determine the exact year of the Great East Hall. The date from Tang offered credible information. But Ninggong Yu is a name. But do we know the general information and what era the person lived in and what was his or her background? So Ninggong Yu was a very important piece of information about a person. We just mentioned the name, which appeared on the beam structure of the Great East Hall and also on a stone pagoda. And inside the hall, on a Buddhist altar, there is a life-sized statue of a middle-aged woman. So Mr. Liang came here on a study tour, and he determined that this statue is the investor of this hall. And her name is Ninggong Yu. But in ancient China, the social status of women was much lower than men. In that era, a woman could have the ability to sponsor a construction, as in your word, invest in the construction of a temple. So Ninggong Yu is a middle-aged woman, but her identity has some royal background. At the time, Mr. Liang Sicheng speculated that she might be the wife of the man whose name was recorded on a beam structure, someone surnamed Wang, or maybe another one with the surname Lin. And both people appeared on a beam structure, and so Mr. Liang speculated that the one surnamed Wang might be a eunuch from Tang Dynasty, a high-ranking eunuch named Wang Shoucheng. But we have some new studies saying that in the time of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, there was another high-ranking eunuch named Wang Yuanyu. So now most scholars believe it's Wang Yuanyu. So historical verification is quite complex, so I won't go into details. So basically, she has the royal identity who was in charge of transporting supplies and goods from then capital Chang'an, and she was in charge of transporting a considerable amount of silver, some funds, some utensils from Chang'an all the way to Foguang Temple. So she was the person in charge of the transportation. So she has several identities. And the locals say that the statue might be Wu Zetian. That was just one of those versions, and she was also a sponsor of the building because the construction of Foguang Temple has a royal background. So this key project with a royal background was able to be completed within just a few years, becoming what we see right now. So it should be the one that we have now on the screen. In this location, could you tell us a bit more about its specific location? So this is the hall. It was built on a hillside. The mountain behind is the Foguang Mountain, sitting on the east, facing the west. Entering from its main gate, from west to east, it is divided into 3 courtyards. The first courtyard is very large, very spacious. After entering from the main gate, you arrive at the second courtyard, which is the second layer. And then further up is the Great East Hall, which is on the third courtyard, and the highest layer. So through this doorway, you have a very steep step you have to climb up, and then there is the open platform. And when you look up, you are overwhelmed by this grand building. So the current one, with all the bricks on this building, must be laid when it was maintained and reinforced later. Its original form should be a wooden structure, correct? The entire Foguang Temple has been repaired many times in history. So in history, actually before the Tang Dynasty, the Foguang Temple had already been built. It could trace back to the Northern Wei period. As for the Great East Hall, it was built in the late Tang Dynasty during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong. As for the other buildings, they have experienced ups and downs through the years, being destroyed many times because of wars and other reasons, and it has been rebuilt many times. Many buildings with various styles are presented in one temple, but the main hall, the Great East Hall, was authentic 90%. As you have just mentioned, the construction of the temple was supported by powerful forces, both politically and financially. So the workers who built it must have the most famous craftsmanship at the time. So their wisdom, can we still see them right now? The Tang Dynasty Hall that we see now is a living example. It's authentically reflecting the best of Tang architecture from more than 1,000 years ago. The craftsmen who came from the capital of Chang'an, they had the highest level in building techniques. So this is well reflected in the Great East Hall. So to help our viewers, especially viewers from overseas, to understand its internal structure, we have prepared a little AR and VR effects. On this side of your screen, there will be a structure, and can you tell us what it is and what role it played in the Great East Hall of Foguang Temple? So this is Dougong, the soul of ancient Chinese architecture. The wisdom of ancient builders is all concentrated in the Dougong. And let's take a look at the set of Dougong on the column, and we can take it apart. And in fact, it's simply a Do and Gong, the two components. But as simple as they look, when combined, they can change in many ways, and the possibilities are limitless. And it embodies the wisdom of Chinese craftsmen over thousands of years. Beneath, you can see a bigger Do, which is the heaviest component of this Dougong structure. It is divided into vertical and horizontal components, piled up layer by layer into all directions. The topmost layer is very spacious, so in this way it can support the weight of the entire building. So the heavy roof of ancient buildings with a deep overhanging eave is to protect the walls and the base of the columns from rain and moisture. So Dougong plays a very important role in cantilevering and bearing weight. So that is to say, it is above the column below, but it is beneath the roof. It is in a middle layer to support a longer eave. So using a common term of the ordinary people, it's there to support the eave, and it's just like an umbrella that is extended outward so that it can protect the wall below from moisture, and because at the time they were using adobe walls. So when I see this structure, at first I was just overwhelmed because each part of it has a name. So how to produce such a Dougong structure? Well, as I just mentioned, Dougong consists of a Do and a Gong, but a complete set of Dougong also has various names. In the Song Dynasty, there was a set of names, and there was a different set of names in Qing Dynasty, but early architectures followed the naming system of Ying Zao Fa Shi in Song Dynasty to describe different parts. So this set of Dougong in the Great East Hall is the Tang building. So we use the names from that manual to roughly analyze and describe them. And the one at the bottom is called the cap block. It seems like the entire master of the Dougong family, and it holds up the entire structure. So it's the king under the roof. So the Dougong extends in both vertical and horizontal directions, and the vertical parts mainly serve to cantilever the eave, just like one's arms, layer by layer. And then the heavy weight of the roof through cantilever layer by layer, the forces transition to this large ludo bracket, and then to the column, and then to the foundation. So this is how the physics works. So about the components in a vertical direction, we mainly refer to the ludo. We have actually two components, and this is called the huagong, and this one is called the shangchao. So further down, we have two tips, and it's called ang, and this one is called the xiaang. So because right now it's been hidden in this complex structure, and if I were to take it out separately, how long is it? So it's 4.5 meters long, and this is the longest component in ancient Chinese architectures. So in the process of building, do we build the columns first and then assemble a Dougong and then finally put it down a column? Exactly. So this involves the standardization of Chinese architecture. So it's a pattern material division system, and in Ying Zao Fa Shi, it's even recorded. So throughout the Chinese dynasties, and architectures were built very frequently by each dynasty, and because of wars. So within 1 or 2 years, then you will have to complete a whole compound of architecture. So this involves a standardized pattern of building method. So it's very standardized. A single building with hundreds to thousands of Dougongs involve craftsmen in different fields, manufacturing different localities, and so they follow a unified site for separate manufacturing, and then they assemble them in Chang'an. So this is a very complete standardization process, and it's very strict. So we have prepared a picture which we'll show on this side of the screen. Let's show our audience a design drawing. And so this drawing, I think it's very related to the Ying Zao Fa Shi. So I have some detailed questions. So what is the question does this one wants to address? So this is the front elevation projection of Great East Hall, and we call it the front projection. Outside the contour of the Great East Hall, you can see the red lines with squares and circles, and according to Ying Zao Fa Shi, there was the square-circle diagram and the circle-square diagram. There are squares within circles and circles within squares. So this is a high-level summary of design concept in China. So it takes the facade of a building as an example and showcasing the proportion of its height and width with geometric patterns of the circle and square diagram. So this showcases the master of ancient craftsmen of the scale of the structure. So let's take a look at the Great East Hall, and it actually has 3 rectangles and 2 squares in the middle with 2 circles on both sides, and there are 2 half rectangles combined. So altogether you have 3 squares. And if they are separated, they will represent the proportion of the width and depth of the hall. So that is equivalent to the golden ratio in the West. So this is the Chinese golden ratio. So can I take it as that after hundreds and thousands of years of practice and this design style was formed, and then after summarized by people in the Song Dynasty, then we have this diagram to summarize this practice. Yes, you can take it this way, and we also have some wooden pagodas which can follow this pattern, and this reflects the wisdom of the ancient Chinese people. Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. You're welcome.
That recounts the evolution of Buddhism in China as well as the art history of East Asia architecture. It invokes spirituality with its sheer architectural brilliance, delineating sacred pursuits from worldly pleasure, which are best enjoyed in other establishments. Daming Palace, an imperial palace complex of the Tang Dynasty, was located in Chang'an, or modern-day Xi'an, in northwest China's Shanxi province. It stood as a symbol of the authority, luxury, ambition, and the pride of the most powerful empire of its era. Within its grand construction and eventual destruction lies the story of a dynasty's rise and fall. Join me to tell the story of this magnificent palace is Geng Shuo, Associate Professor of the School of Humanities, Central Academy of Fine Arts.
Professor Geng, welcome, and thank you for having me. Hi everyone, I'm Geng Shuo with the School of Humanities from the Central Academy of Fine Arts. It's a great pleasure to come to your program to share with you my views on Tang Dynasty's buildings and the Daming Palace. So the position we see behind us right now, I think it's the front part of the Daming Palace. Yes, that is the main hall of Daming Palace at the time. So for most Chinese, the best known palace is Forbidden City, but I think this overall scale is larger than Forbidden City. Yes, and it takes 3.2 square kilometers, which is 4 times the size of Forbidden City. So this is a fairly large architectural complex. And how was it built in over 1,000 years ago? And I feel that it's not that long. Well, yes, when Gaozong decided to expand the Daming Palace, then they spent only 10 months. So the main project of the Daming Palace with an area of 3.2 square kilometers was completed, and so this is less than a year. So the construction of ancient Chinese architecture to follow some rules. So what is the secret? So from a large building to a small one, and there are some basic rules of size to follow. So today, we call it the model or the mode of the model, and in Song, and they call it Cai Fen. So basically, it's precise calculation, and it's prefabricated components built, then assembled at the very final process. And at the very beginning, different parts, they were assigned to different craftsmen. So my understanding of this is that it sounds a bit like building blocks, and you just need to build each part first, like one-to-one reproduction, and then you assemble them together. The Daming Palace has a spatial division. It follows the palace system in ancient Chinese tradition of outer court, imperial bedchambers. And so the front court has 3 palaces, and then you have Han Yuan and Xuanzheng and Zicheng Ha. So those were the place for the government officials to handle public affairs. But you cannot spend all the time doing business. You have to take some rest. And then at the backyard, you need to have some freestyle design for to accommodate people's living. So this is actually resembling the fairyland. So in that pool, after archaeological excavation, we have uncovered remains of islands. So it indeed mimics the fairy islands. And we even identified some remnants of lotus pods and leaves. So that was specifically to create the kind of fairyland feeling. Yes, and it's just the poem with lotus in a pool and willows by the hall. And along this Taiye pool, there were many palaces, and among them, the largest is the Mingde Palace. And we have in the studio a model. And can you tell us which part of Daming Palace this model represents? So this is not a single hall. It actually has 3 halls, front, middle, and back. And also there are 2 towers on both sides. I think this is the most beautiful palace called Linde Hall, and it's actually behind the Daming Palace. So it has front, middle, and the rear halls arranged in a charmingly scattered manner, and on both sides of the 3 halls there were some other towers. And if Hanyuan Hall is the most magnificent, then the Linde Hall is the most luxurious. I've been to the hall, so you can visit. Yes, on the ground we still preserved some pattern bricks from the Tang Dynasty. And through this, we can actually imagine what it was like back then. Because this is a huge Daming palace, and how can we determine which of these unearthed relics belong to the Linde Hall and what is the most distinctive feature? So because in the archives there were records, the Linde Hall was a place for holding banquets and state dinners. That is the place where the emperor and his courtiers enjoyed themselves together, and also used to receive foreign guests. So given the sophisticated structure that we have unearthed, we can confirm that this is the Linde Hall. And there were some major state banquets. For example, when Empress Wu Zetian in the early 8th century, so Wada on Mahito, the Japanese envoy to the Tang Dynasty, they paid a visit to the palace, and it was there that they had the banquet. So you talked about the Japanese delegation to Tang, and during that time, Chang'an defined the term international metropolis, and so at the best of time it has a population of over 1 million, and that was almost unimaginable at the time. So the construction of Daming Palace should have been spread through these foreigners who came to China. And so did the palace have any influence, at least within Asia, on the architecture styles in other countries? Yes, at the time, the fame of Daming Palace spread to more palaces along the Silk Road, and everybody would say that in the east, in Chang'an, there is a magnificent palace. So if we were to restore the structure of Daming Palace so that the outsiders can understand its form, how could we do that? Well, this is not easy because restoring such a large-scale palace structure is fairly difficult because the above-ground buildings, they were disappeared, and it's not easy. So I think there are several sources of information. We need to rely on archaeological excavation because the Daming Palace has undergone comprehensive excavations, and from the southernmost gate, Danfeng Gate, all the way to Taiye Pool. So you know all those information. And then with other records in the archives, some people carved the so-called Chang'an map. And so part of this stone carving was well preserved in today's Xi'an. And also you can use reference of images. And we have Dunhuang murals, and where many painters kept the ancient patterns. And over the years in Xi'an, we have excavated a lot of relics, and many of them were tomb murals. So the owners had very high social status. So we also have information from archives and historic materials, and when combined together, we can represent and reconstruct the image of Daming Palace. But this is not definitely the case, and we still need to deliberate on many details, but so far we are able to represent the image of Daming Palace. So another question I have is that, did the entire construction of Daming Palace, which was passed down through written records, does it have any influence on later generations in terms of the construction of architectures and palaces? Is there any influence, for example, in the construction of Forbidden City? Well, I think there is a high level of continuity, and as we just mentioned, the outer courts and the imperial bedchambers, that is the basic layout that we have followed. And in Forbidden City, you can see that it mainly combines the area for working and living, and within the Red Walls, and then Jingshan Park to the north, and then Beihai to the west. So in general, there are in general, I think they are relevant to the Taiyapu of Daming Palace. So in general, we could find some similarities. So Daming Palace left some long-lasting impact. So the Daming Palace is very well preserved in terms of historic records. So when you enter Daming Palace today, you wouldn't be able to see the actual palaces, but you can still reimagine the structure through some cartoons. So thank you very much.
Daming Palace still thrived. The capital city of Chang'an was a vibrant global hub, a true beacon of cosmopolitanism. It was the place where people came to pursue their political, commercial, and literary ambitions. In a world, it is place of dream. Welcome back, and now let's step into the great Chang'an city. It was one of the largest cities in the world at that time, bringing together diverse cultures full of charm and wisdom. To hold my hand and turn around this ancient city is Martijn de Geus, Associate Professor from the School of Architecture of Tsinghua University. Professor, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your research in the university?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm a Dutch architect originally, so I grew up in Holland, but I've been living in China for the past 15 years, and I'm an associate professor in Tsinghua University School of Architecture. My personal expertise is not necessarily historic architecture, but I'm interested in the junction or the relation or the interaction between Eastern and Western thinking, Eastern and Western design, and Eastern and Western architecture. So in that regard, I'm here with you today.
Wonderful. Then I think we'll be in the safe hands, because Chang'an and the Tang Dynasty was the most cosmopolitan period of the Chinese time, at least one of them. And we need that kind of a background input from you about that interaction between ancient China and the world outside China. But my first question is, what drew you in the first place to this field of study?
Right. Originally growing up in Holland and being taught in the Western architectural education system, I thought that all of the world's architecture was Western and was modern. And until about 18 or 17 years old, I realized there's much more than that. There's a whole other side of this world, which is the so-called Eastern side. And I was interested in exploring that. And I realized that the place to explore the origin of Eastern culture is China.
From your perspective as a professional, what is the most distinguishing feature of this ancient city?
I think if you look at it as a non-professional, you might think, oh, it's the color, it's very red here, or it's the roof. But from a professional point of view, having studied the plan so often, we look at the composition of the city. So, for instance, the city layout. And there's a very specific and interesting elements about the layout of Chang'an city. So it has a particular kind of grid, or a chessboard pattern, or a gridiron pattern. It means there are repetitive blocks of structures of streets and laneways that together form a kind of perfect square. And in that square, they have organized the functions efficiently and appropriately.
I think we actually have a very special demonstration of it that we can project on the screen.
Okay.
Maybe now it's time for us to kind of bring that on. It shows probably less a chessboard in the sense of the chess in a Western game, but I think we can compare it to a Go board. Maybe can we see that
Sure.
on the screen? Yeah, it's on your side, Professor.
Yep.
Yes, at the
Great.
drop of the Go stones. Is that a very clear demonstration or comparison to how Chang'an was designed?
Yes, I think what we can see here on the model is that there is a clear pattern of longitudinal lines from east to west and from north to south, and that they create blocks or patterns that we would call in the chessboard the black and white squares, but they also create intersections. And the Go pieces you're typically placed at the intersection.
On intersections.
Yes, that's right. So what we can see here on the screen on the model is that those intersections create points where people come together, where trade happens, where maybe cafes or markets are.
Chang'an City was separated into more than 100 wards. So for different wards, they served as people's residence, and some wards served as markets. I think in Chang'an there were at least 7 markets, but 2 of them were the major places where people went to buy and sell goods. But for this kind of very neat, very clear design, what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose from the perspective of the planners of the city?
Well, we can of course not trace back what was in their mind originally, what they were thinking about designing this, but you can generally say there are 2 or 3 purposes of this. One is one of security. It's easy to control a city when you know where everybody lives and what they do. So there was also a clear wall around the city and clear wards that could be cordoned off. Taxes could be distributed appropriately. Income could be checked, your state of business could be checked. So it's a sense of security and administration. Secondly, it's efficiency. It's very efficient to know where to go.
Where to go, exactly.
Yes, because the streets are clear, they're long, they're straight, and they're east to west, north to south. It's easy to orient yourself.
I think it's not very easy to get lost in a city like this. And I'd like to tap into your background as not just a professor from Tsinghua University, but also your background as an international expatriate living in China. Had there ever been other cities across the world throughout the history of human civilization that bear the resemblance to the design of Chang'an? Can you think of any other ancient cities?
Sure. I actually mentioned, the grid pattern or the Go pattern or chessboard pattern is a very popular pattern for organizing cities since ancient times all over the world. So, for instance, in Western society, you can find examples from classical ancient Greece, like in the city planning of Miletus, which is a very famous example that I had to study in school, in university. It's also a clear pattern. This pattern was adopted with east and west lanes and north and south lanes, and it was similar but also different. For instance, it was not a perfect square. Like it would adapt itself to the surrounding, and it had less of a symbolic figure. It has more of a practical implementation. And we can see even till nowadays, in recent modern times, cities are still planned like that. If we look at Manhattan in New York. Yes, the grid is very famous. Most people would have some image of the grid of Manhattan. And it's a very, very equal grid, west to east, north to south, with a big park in the center. But in principle, it's the same idea.
I just find it very interesting that it's a human obsession with the symmetry, with access, and that's exactly how Chang'an was designed. You can see this, it's symmetrical. So what is this human obsession with this pattern?
There are 2 things here. One is our obsession with the pattern itself. It comes from the fact that we need to have an ability to measure things. Yeah, especially for tax purposes or land sales. We need to know how big something is. And we measure that in particular sizes, in feet, for instance, or in Chinese. And these sizes can go up and down, and you can multiply them. And if we know a basic size, we can create a pattern very easily. Yeah? The question of symmetry is something which is somehow biologically defined. It's a way that we as humans are able to appreciate beauty. like we see with 2 eyes, 2 ears.
2 ears, exactly.
And our face is also cut in the middle, right? And the most important or prominent features like our mouth. Or our nose, they're located in the center. So that's the way we see the world, and that's the way we like to organize the world. So if we look at the image behind us, an excellent example, you can see that more or less the 2 sides are similar.
Yes.
And the central axis is used to organize the very important organs, the organs of administration or the organs of religion or spaces along that line. So it's a way for us to naturally organize things, and we find that beautiful.
And to live in this kind of city, because with the CGTN's project to rebuild the Tang space, that we're trying to kind of rebuild everything from the scratch, because unfortunately, none of the features of the back to Tang time probably still exist today. So in order to recreate this space, where do you think that requires the attention of the recreators?
I think, the literal buildings and feelings might not exist nowadays in society, right? But the cultural elements of that time and the aesthetics and the elements that have evolved still are very much present in contemporary society, right? So I think when we look at these spaces and when you rebuild something digitally, you might find that in the end it's still people. People used to live there, and we are also people nowadays. So we should not forget that maybe even if it was a long time ago, we as people are still people, and people at that time went out for a drink. At that time they went out to meet people, and at that time was a very, very colorful life. In fact, Chang'an was probably the most cosmopolitan city of its time.
Yeah, at this time. Yeah, maybe we can now imagine, because it feels like we're walking on the street, for the Chang'an. And maybe suppose that obviously I'm the Chinese walking on it, and I have my foreign friend. Maybe we are in the business relationship. So can you imagine, or can you kind of put your feet in the shoes of a foreign business person for the first time stepping into the city? What would be your feeling? What would be your impression of it? Can you kind of recreate that for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. We always think of, as foreigners, of China as being, very Chinese, we call it. It's very typical. But if you would enter Chang'an at that time, there would be about 500,000 foreigners living in the city, which is a number that's larger than my hometown. My hometown only 150,000 people. So 500,000 foreigners living in this city from all kind of areas, and they would come from what we now call maybe Persia or the Middle East, or from further down the Silk Road, anywhere along those lines. And you have to imagine that China was mostly an agricultural nation, but there were trade hubs and trade routes. And in this city, those trade routes came together, whether they were canals or roads. So you could imagine that you could meet people here with different religions, with different skin colors, with different cultural customs, and they were all happily trading. They were happily living together. There were different religious buildings, different temples from different parts of the world. So it was actually a city like one that's
maybe modern-day Beijing or Shanghai or New York.
Yes, it's a very modern city in that way. It's very diverse, it's very inclusive, and people could freely express themselves in that regard.
When I did my research into China City, I took special interest in how foreign business people, when they came to China, what would they do? Because when you actually put your feet in their shoes, there's a whole lot of questions came up. And first, I wouldn't be able to speak the language, local language, or maybe not in local town. So the first place, I wanted to find a place that to help me to kind of adapt to the local environment. And I didn't know that actually in the Western market in Chang'an, that is the market where all the foreign trades take place. In there, they actually served as an agent for tradesmen from across the world. They even served, maybe in the later time period, they even served as the bank. So it should credit to help them to adapt to the local business or commercial environment. That's incredible. I didn't know this before until I did my homework.
I think you make a good comparison. The Western market functioned as a kind of platform. Yeah, and so it functioned as a platform for goods from abroad to enter Chang'an. But on the other hand, it was also a platform for Chinese goods to go back, and Chinese cultural customs, and whether they were related to money or language or food or whatever. So there's an exchange. And what you just mentioned about, contemporary cities like Beijing and Shanghai, they also have elements like that. Even like where I work in the university, we have people from all over the world, right? From cultures, foods, religions from all over the world. And the university is a kind of playground for ideas. At that time, the market was a kind of a playground of ideas and exchange in that period. And we could meet there together. Maybe we would have dressed differently. And maybe we didn't have fancy glasses yet, but we could probably still find a cafe, sit down, have a drink, and have some food. And we don't need language. We can trade.
Simply, but we could communicate simply with the gestures.
Yes, that's right.
So based on Chang'an, and I'm sure that you studied modern technology as well as architecture. So what could be the lessons that we draw from the planning of Chang'an that maybe we can still use in modern day, not just for city planning, because it's a cosmopolitan city, and now against this global kind of environment, people will say that there's anti-globalization trends in the world now. So is there any lesson that we can draw from Chang'an, that we can still use to get us, to take with us, to carry with us into the future?
I would certainly hope so. I think so. I think from the planning perspective, sure, there are many lessons that we can take, and we can still see that contemporary cities like Beijing are also still organized in similar grid ways. And that's efficient, and it is helpful for administering the city. And what's good is that within that grid, things can change over time. It doesn't matter. The city can stay the same. The buildings can change. People can move. That's fine. But I hope that most importantly, what we can take away from ancient Chang'an is this environment where people can live together harmoniously under the idea that we are there for a common good. People were in Chang'an because they all had the idea of trade, of communication.
They aspire to do something, be they business people that come to Chang'an to make their business, to do commerce, or be the aspiring young people seeking a career development in Chang'an. This place is first popular, and I think it has this open mind to open its doors to everybody. But still, it has. Well, in the old days, it still had the restrictions because people would,
of course,
needed to stay in the walls. But still, that design, I guess, can from two sides to teach us something.
Yes, I think coming from the West, I'm coming from Holland, where everything is open and free for everybody all the time in a way. I find it very comfortable living in a city like Beijing, where my community is a bit more safe. And not everybody can come in all the time. And if I have a problem, I can go to my neighborhood officer, and they will know me personally. Oh, Martin, yeah, no problem. Have a sit. What's your issue? And I think this idea of having smaller communities in a bigger group can really work well in contemporary society as well, because you would know each other on a small scale, and you have bigger places like the market or the university or your workplace where you can go and communicate in larger groups. I think that's an interesting way to look at society. But
small community, but definitely without the door that closes at night, it only opens in the morning.
Yes, when I was a student in Tsinghua, we had that as well. It was hard to get used to. I prefer that I can go in and out of my house when I please.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time and your contribution. I've learned a lot. This idea of design a city because they care about first the security and then efficiency. I'm sure that is the thing that's shared by the city planners across the world throughout human history. But from the design of Chang'an, from what I learned from you during our conversation, do you think there's any lesson that we can draw from the planning of the city that is still useful today?
Sure. I think, as you mentioned, contemporary society is more and more diverse. We are more and more global. And our cities, especially those hubs of the world cities like New York, like London or Amsterdam and like Beijing or
and
Shanghai.
Yeah.
Yes, they need to accommodate for a diversity of cultures and a proper and good and prosperous exchange of ideas, goods and innovation. And I think that's what we can take to the future, hopefully. And we can have this network of world cities that contribute to the future of humanity together.
I think with its advantage, I mean the design of China with its advantage and with the drawbacks, we can learn a lot. And thank you, Professor, the interesting stuff. I've learned a lot about my own culture, but from a definitely different and more diverse perspectives. Thank you very much. Our first adventure into the Tang world ends here, but it's merely a prelude. The tour de force will begin soon. Download the CGTN app or go to cgtn.com to watch the 6-episode documentary Tang Architecture Building Timeless Glory and explore an interactive website that unveils the mysteries buried in Tang's cultural past. You can also follow CGTN on your favorite social media network. Together, let's admire the framework of an epic world. Bye-bye.